Hello there and welcome to my paint guide for painting Zombicide Rio Z Janeiro part 1. I'm going to be doing 3 characters to begin with. It's Dona, Eliete and Vivi. I've lumped all those together because basically they're all quite light colours. As you can see, I sprayed them all white to begin with to help with the brightness and lightness of all the colours. 2 of the characters are wearing white clothes, but we're going to paint them both wildly different. So Donna will receive a base coat of Wraithbone all over the areas that will be white. I'll then mix in some Army Painter matte white for a 50-50 mix, and I'll start layering that on top. I'll then mix in some more matte white, so we've got a 70-30 split in favour of matte white. And then finally a couple of layers of matte white by itself to really emphasise that colour. With Eliete, I'm probably pronouncing that horrifically wrong, so apologies if I have. They're going to get a darker sort of greyish white, so we're going to be undercoating everywhere with some grey cere. Much like the Wraithbone, we're going to add a 50-50 mix of grey cere and matte white. Then add some more matte white, creating a 70-30 mix in the favour of matte white. And then finally a couple of coats of matte white just by itself to really emphasise all those ridges. For Vivi, we're going to paint all her dress with Nurgling green. And this will be given a light wash of Athonian Camo shade. Once the shade is dry, I'm going to use Nurgling green once again to start highlighting all the colours, just leaving all the recesses alone. I'm then going to do a 50-50 mix of matte white and Nurgling green to start the first highlight. And again, I'll add a little bit more matte white to the mix, so we've got about a 70-30 mix in favour of matte white. With the dress out of the way, we're going to move back to Donna, and I want to paint her sash with some Morghast brown. The first highlight will be a mix of Morghast brown with Wraithbone to a 50-50 ratio, followed by a 30-70 mix of Morghast brown and Wraithbone for the next highlight. And then finally, just using Wraithbone by itself for the edge highlighting. Her player card shows she's got some blue on this sash, so I'm going to use Thousand Suns blue to copy the pattern that we see on the card. I'll also do the same for the detailing at the top of her dress as well. Both areas will then get a highlight with Temple Guard blue. Try and be as careful as you can at this stage, because obviously we don't want to mess up the white we've just painted. Now I'm going to start working on their skin. Now all 3 characters have a slightly different skin tone. So for Donna, she'll get a coat of Catachan flesh. Vivi will get a coat of Blood Reaver flesh. And Eliete will get a coat of Bugman's Glow. All 3 will then get a wash of whitened flesh. With the washes now dry, we're going to start painting the eyes before we do the rest of the detailing of the skin. That way, if we make any mistakes, we're painting the eyes, we can easily cover up as we do the next steps. So bad and black to do the undercoat for the eyes. Then matte white. And then finally, bad and black again for the pupils. With the eye safely done and out of the way, we'll continue with the skin. So I'm going to do another coat of Catachan flesh on top of Donna's skin. And this will be followed up by a 50-50 mix of Catachan flesh and Blood Reaver flesh. For Vivi, it's going to be tidying up the wash with some Blood Reaver flesh, followed up by some Night Quester flesh mixed with the Blood Reaver flesh, about 50-50. And for the final highlight, will be Night Quester flesh just by itself. I'm then going to paint her lips with a little bit of Word Bearer's Red, just to emphasise that she's wearing a lipstick. For Eliete's flesh, I'm going to tidy up that wash with some Bugwin's Glow, followed by a 50-50 mix of Bugwin's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. And then a final highlight of Cadian Flesh Tone just by itself. I'll also at this stage paint in her teeth using some matte white. With the flesh out of the way, we'll continue with the rest of the detailing. So I'll go back to Donna and I'll start painting the sort of undershirt she's wearing with some Rakgarth flesh. I'll then give the area a coat of Army Painter Soft Tone, and while that dries, I'll continue with the rest of the details. For her belt, I'm going to use Steel Legion Drab, and that'll also get followed up by a coat of Army Painter Soft Tone. I then use Screaming Bell for the shaft of her axe, and Retributor Armor for the gold bracelets on her wrist. Both of these areas were then given a coat of Reikland Flesh Shade. While all those washes dried, I then used Mephiston Red to start painting in all the beads around her neck and on her wrist. These were then given a wash of Carroburg Crimson. I then went back and recoated Rakgarth's flesh, leaving all the shade recesses on her undershirt. And then I highlighted her belt with Steel Legion Drab. I needed to paint her hair, so that was given a quick coat of Grey Sear, followed by a quick highlight with matte white. I also used some Grey Sear to paint in her eyebrows as well. I then highlighted her beads with some Evil Sun Scarlet. I also picked out a few beads here and there on a couple of the chains with some matte white. The gold on her wrists was then highlighted with some Uruk Armor Gold. Before I paint the silver, I'm going to start to work more on Vivi, so I painted all her pouches with XV88. The handle of her machete with some Rakgarth flesh. And the bandages wrapped around her arm were painted with Zandri dust. All of this was then given a coat of Army Painter Soft Tone. I then painted both her bracelets with Retributor Armor, which was then given a wash with some Reikland Flesh Shade. I used Rakgarth flesh to highlight the grip of the machete. I then used Ushabti Bone to highlight the bandages. And that was followed by some Screaming Skull for some final edge highlighting. XV88 was then used to start highlighting the pouches, followed by a mix of XV88 and Taolite Ochre, about 50-50. And then Taolite Ochre to do the very tips and the points of the patches. I then started working on the weapons. Iron Warriors was used to paint the back of the shotgun. Iron Hand Steel was then used to paint the rest of the metallics on the shotgun, both machetes, and I also painted her belt as well. I also painted Donna's axe as well. The handle and the grip of the shotgun were then both painted with Corvus Black. Vivi's boots were then painted with some Black Templar contrast paint. On her player card it shows she's actually wearing tights, so I used some Basil Canum Grey just to paint that over the flesh that we painted earlier. All of the metallics we then just painted were given a wash with some Nuln Oil, and that includes Donna's axe as well. After that wash had dried, I used some Dryad Bark to paint in Vivi's hair. The boots were then highlighted with Corvus Black. And I very carefully picked out 3 pearls around her neck, because on her player card she's actually wearing a pearl necklace. Her belt buckle was then highlighted with Eshin Grey. For all the metallics, I then used some Stormhost Silver to give everything an edge highlight. Finally, looking at the player card again, it appears that Vivi has actually got kind of a red tint to her hair, so I'm going to use some Caramberg Crimson to shade her hair. Elite's belt was then painted with some Caliban Green. This was then highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Caliban Green and I'm really terrible at pronouncing names, Cabalite Green. Cabalite Green was then used as a final highlight by itself. Balor Brown was then used to paint in all of Elite's hair, which itself was given a wash with some Army Painter Soft Tone. All of the bases were then painted with some Dawnstone Grey, stippled with some Corvus Black, and again with some Grey Sear. Corvus Black was then used again with a nice thin brush to paint in some cracks in the concrete. The rims were then painted with Abaddon Black, and they were all given a wash with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. The next 2 steps are completely optional and you don't have to do them at all, but I like to give my miniatures a little bit of protection as they end up going back into a plastic case, so I give them a coat with some matte varnish. Once that was dried, I then applied some Blood for the Blood God to add a little bit of gore to both the weapons on Dona and Vivi. The best way to get blood smear lines is to use your brush and just flick it along. Be very careful though not to actually touch the model, unless of course you actually want to get some blood splatters on their clothing. And with that, that's Vivi, Elite and Dona finished. I'm definitely pronouncing Elite wrong. I hope you found this guide useful if you followed it. And if you didn't follow and you just actually checked out for some paint tips, I hope that helped. White can be a big pain in the backside, and it took a long time for me to sort of get used to it. But as you can see, it's got 2 very different types of white right there. All in all, it took about 8 hours to complete all 3 models, because there's quite a lot of fiddly detailing there, but they are worth it once they're finished. If you want to see more, just hit that subscribe button, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye for now.